I never thought I'd share this story with anyone, but after hearing what happened to the person who moved into my old apartment, I feel like I have to. Maybe it'll help someone else avoid what I went through. I'm still shaken up about it, but here goes. This happened a couple years ago when I was living in Lagos. I just gotten a new job and moved into a small apartment in Surulere. It wasn't much, one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a sitting room, but it was within my budget, and in Lagos that's no small blessing. The building was old though, the kind that looked like it had been standing since the colonial days, with cracks on the walls and faint musty smells that never quite went away no matter how much you cleaned. At first, everything seemed normal. It wasn't the nicest place, but I was content. I liked how quiet the neighborhood was, especially at night. After living in the chaos of Lagos, quiet was a luxury. But that quiet didn't last long. It started about 2 weeks after I moved in. I was lying in bed late at night, scrolling through my phone, trying to fall asleep, when I heard it. A soft knock on the wall. Not loud, just a single tap, then silence. At first, I thought maybe it was my neighbors. The walls in that building weren't very thick, and I could sometimes hear muffled conversations or the sound of furniture moving. So I ignored it. But then it happened again. Another knock. This time, it came from the wall right next to my bed. I froze, staring at the wall like it might somehow explain itself. Was it a rat? Lagos is full of them, and I wouldn't have been surprised. But rats don't knock. I shook it off and tried to sleep, but the knocking kept happening, random, soft, and deliberate. Sometimes it was just one knock. Other times it was 2 or 3. I'd sit up, heart pounding, waiting for it to stop. And it always did, just when I thought about getting up to investigate. By the next morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe it really was a rat, or something with the old pipes. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I didn't mention it to anyone. But then it got worse. The knocking started happening every night, and it wasn't just soft taps anymore. It grew louder, more aggressive. It moved too sometimes from the wall by my bed, other times from the kitchen. There were nights I'd wake up to a sound so loud I swore someone was hammering the walls. I remember one night in particular. I'd just gotten back from work, exhausted. I made some noodles for dinner, sat in front of my tiny television, and tried to relax. It was around midnight when I heard it again, bang, 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 this time coming from the sitting room wall. I jumped up, heart racing. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice sounded shaky, even to me. No answer, just silence. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I walked over to the wall and pressed my ear against it. I don't know what I expected to hear, maybe nothing. But what I did hear still makes my skin crawl. There was breathing, slow, raspy breathing, like someone struggling to catch their breath. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my coffee table. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my room, clutching my phone, ready to call someone, anyone if it happened again. The next day, I told my friend Folake about it. She's the type who always has a story or explanation for everything, and I hoped she'd make me feel less crazy. "Ah, Tosin," she said, shaking her head. "I've heard of this happening to people. What are they?" She lowered her voice, leaning in like we were sharing some dark secret. "They say there are spirits trapped between walls. They knock because they're trying to get out. But if you answer them or disturb them, they'll come for you." I laughed nervously. "Come for me how?" "You don't want to know," she said, her face deadly serious. I wanted to brush it off as superstition, but the look in her eyes shook me. And the knocking wasn't stopping. If anything, it was getting worse. A few nights later, I was lying in bed when I heard it again this time, the loudest it had ever been. Bang, bang, bang. It felt like the whole apartment was vibrating. I jumped up, ran to the sitting room, and froze. The wall, the one where I'd first heard the breathing, had deep scratches all over it. Long, jagged lines that hadn't been there before. It was like something had been clawing at it from the inside. I packed a bag that night and went to stay with my cousin in Ikorodu. I didn't even care if I was overreacting. I just couldn't stay there anymore. A few weeks later, I got a call from the landlord. He was panicking, asking me if I'd ever seen or heard anything strange in the apartment. Apparently, the new tenant, a young man in his 30s, had been found dead. His body was discovered after neighbors complained about a smell. When they broke down the door, they found him lying in the sitting room, surrounded by scratch marks on the walls and floor. The coroner couldn't determine a cause of death, and there were no visible injuries on his body aside from the scratches. I don't know what happened to him. I don't want to know. I just thank God I got out when I did. Even now, I can't hear a knock without my heart racing. I moved far away from Lagos after that. and I'll never live in an old building again. Some things are better left unexplained. You ever had something happen to you that you can't quite explain, but you know, deep down, it was real? Well, I've got one for you. I've never talked about it, but it's been sitting heavy on me for years. Back in 2016, I worked on a cocoa farm in a small village in the Ivory Coast. I'd been there for about 3 years at the time. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it put food on the table. And honestly, the isolation of the farm was kind of peaceful. The days were long and hard, but the nights were quiet. That's what I liked most, until those nights weren't quiet anymore. It started on a Tuesday, I remember, because it was market day. I'd spent the whole morning helping load sacks of cocoa onto a truck headed for Abidjan. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was dead tired. I was sitting outside my small hut, nursing a lukewarm bottle of beer, when I heard it for the first time. Laughter. Not the hearty, grown man kind. No, this was light and playful, children's laughter. It floated on the wind, faint at first, so faint I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time. I set my beer down and stood up, straining my ears. The fields stretched out in front of me, rows and rows of cocoa trees bathed in the pale light of a half moon. There was no way kids were out there at that hour. The village was a good mile away, and everyone knew the farm was no place for kids, especially at night. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cutting through the stillness. The laughter stopped. Just like that, one moment it was there, the next, nothing but the hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves. I waited a few minutes, but when nothing else happened, I chalked it up to exhaustion and went inside. The next few nights passed without incident, and I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, Friday came. I was repairing one of the storage sheds when I noticed something odd. In the dirt outside the shed, there were footprints. Tiny ones, like a child's. Now, this didn't make any sense. No kids came out here, ever. I knelt down to get a better look. The prints were clear, like they'd been made recently, and they led from the edge of the field toward the river that bordered the farm. I followed them as far as I could, but they disappeared near the riverbank. The air felt heavier there, almost suffocating, and I got this strange feeling like I was being watched. I don't know how to explain it, but it was enough to make me turn back. That night, the laughter came again, louder this time. It wasn't distant anymore. It sounded like it was coming from the field right outside my hut. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the porch, my heart pounding in my chest. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the cocoa trees, but there was nothing there. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint, almost like a breath in my ear. "Come and play." I froze. The flashlight shook in my hand as I swung it around, but I didn't see anything. The laughter started up again, receding this time, like it was moving away. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went into the village to restock supplies and decided to ask around. I mentioned the laughter to an older man named Kouassi, who lived there his whole life. His face darkened instantly. "You heard them?" he asked, his voice low. "Them?" I repeated, confused. "The children," he said. "They drowned in the river many years ago. Their spirits linger. Anyone who ventures too close hears their laughter. It's a warning." "A warning for what?" Kouassi shook his head. "The river is cursed. Stay away from it." I wanted to laugh it off, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. That night, the laughter came back, and this time, it was everywhere. It didn't matter where I stood. It surrounded me, echoing from the trees, the fields, the river. I decided I'd had enough. Grabbing a machete and my flashlight, I marched toward the field. The laughter grew louder as I approached, almost gleeful. My hands were shaking, but I kept going. That's when I saw them. Tiny footprints, glowing faintly, like they'd been burned into the soil. They formed a trail leading straight toward the river. My breath caught in my throat as I followed the trail. The air grew colder with each step, and the laughter became distorted, more like screams. When I reached the riverbank, the footprints stopped. The water was still, unnaturally so, like a mirror reflecting the moonlight. I felt that same heavy, suffocating presence from before, but this time it was stronger. I shined my flashlight over the water, and for a split second, I thought I saw faces. Dozens of them, just below the surface, staring up at me with wide, empty eyes. Then the flashlight flickered and went out. The laughter exploded around me, deafening, and I ran. I didn't stop until I was back at my hut, my chest heaving, my heart ready to burst. The next morning, I went back to the river, but the footprints were gone. The soil looked undisturbed, like nothing had happened. I left the farm a week later. couldn't stay there anymore. Even now, years later, I still hear that laughter sometimes in the back of my mind. And every time I wonder, was it a warning or was it an invitation I was lucky enough to refuse? I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's because I need someone to believe me. Maybe it's because I can't sleep anymore and I need to get this off my chest. I don't know. All I know is my life has turned into something I don't recognize, and I'm terrified. A few months ago, I moved to Addis Ababa with my husband and our baby girl, Eleni. It was supposed to be a fresh start. We'd saved for years to buy a house, and when we found this one, a 2-story place tucked into a quiet neighborhood, it felt perfect. It was older, sure, but it had charm. Wide windows that let in the morning sun, a little garden in the back, and enough space for us to grow as a family. The first few days were chaotic but happy. Between unpacking, feeding Eleni, and figuring out where everything should go, I barely had time to think. But then, things started happening. It began with Eleni. She's always been a calm baby, quiet, content, easy to soothe. But whenever I brought her into one particular room, the crying would start. At first, I didn't think much of it. Babies cry. That's just what they do, right? I assumed she was overtired or hungry or just in a mood. The room in question was at the back of the house, near the garden. We planned to use it as her nursery since it was the quietest room in the house. It had soft blue walls, a window overlooking the yard, and plenty of space for her crib and toys. But no matter what I did, she hated being in there. At first, it was small things. She'd squirm in my arms, her face scrunching up as if she were uncomfortable. But then the crying started. Loud, piercing wails that didn't sound like her. She'd twist and thrash in my arms, her little body stiff as a board. The moment I stepped out of the room, she'd stop. It was like flipping a switch. I told my husband about it, but he brushed it off. "She's just a baby," he said. "She'll get used to it." I wanted to believe him, so I tried to ignore it. I spent more time in the room, hoping she'd adjust. I sat with her in my lap, singing softly, trying to make her feel safe. But the longer I stayed, the worse it got. Her cries grew louder, more desperate, and I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't just Eleni. I began to notice strange things about the room. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. It smelled faintly of something metallic, though I couldn't pinpoint the source. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting across the wall, a flicker of light that shouldn't have been there. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, after a particularly rough day, I decided to sleep in the room with Eleni. I thought maybe if I stayed with her, she'd feel more comfortable. I set up a mattress on the floor, placed her crib nearby, and settled in for the night. She fell asleep in my arms, her tiny hand clutching my shirt. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. But then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it, a faint whisper. It was so quiet, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time, a soft, urgent voice murmuring in a language I didn't recognize. My heart raced. I sat up, clutching Eleni to my chest, and scanned the room. Nothing. The whispering stopped, and the room fell silent. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told my husband what happened. He laughed. "You're just tired," he said. "You've been under a lot of stress." I wanted to argue, but he looked so unconcerned, so certain, that I let it go. But the whispering continued. Sometimes it was soft, barely audible. Other times it was louder, more insistent. It always came at night, when the house was quiet and dark. I tried to record it once, but when I played the recording back, there was nothing. Eleni's cries grew worse. She started refusing to eat, her tiny body growing thinner and weaker. I took her to the doctor, but they couldn't find anything wrong. "Maybe she's just adjusting to her new environment," they said. "Give her time." I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Then, last week, I made the discovery that changed everything. I decided to deep clean the room, hoping that maybe a fresh start would help. As I moved the furniture around, I noticed something strange about the floorboards near the window. One of them was loose, slightly raised at the edges. Curious, I pried it up, expecting to find nothing more than dust and debris. What I found instead, it was a bundle of fabric, tightly wrapped and shoved into the hollow space beneath the floor. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The fabric was old and stained, its original color impossible to determine. But as I unwrapped it, I realized what it was. Children's clothing. Tiny shirts and dresses, each one covered in dark, rust-colored stains. Blood. I dropped the bundle and backed away, my stomach lurching. Tears blurred my vision as the weight of what I'd found hit me. This room, this house, it wasn't safe, it wasn't right. Later, I learned the truth. The previous owner had been a man who claimed to be a healer, but rumors swirled about his practices. He was accused of using children in rituals, of spilling their blood to summon something dark. He disappeared years ago, leaving the house abandoned until we bought it. Now I understand why Eleni cried, why she screamed and thrashed every time I brought her into that room. She felt it, the pain, the fear, the lingering presence of the children who suffered here. I don't know if their spirits are trapped or if the room itself is cursed. All I know is we can't stay. We're leaving tomorrow. I don't care where we go, as long as it's far away from here. But I can't stop thinking about those children, about the lives that ended in this house. They deserve justice, or peace, or something I can't give them. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's because I need someone to believe me. Maybe it's because I want someone to remember those children. I don't know. All I know is I'm scared, and I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. I never thought I'd return to my grandmother's village. It wasn't that I didn't like her, she practically raised me, but the village itself had always given me an odd vibe. It was deep in rural Ghana, a place where modern conveniences like electricity and paved roads felt like foreign concepts. But last summer, when my parents asked me to check on her after she fell ill, I didn't hesitate. Family is family, after all. The first thing I noticed when I arrived was how quiet the compound was. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet you'd expect in the countryside, but an unnatural, oppressive stillness. The kind that makes you feel like you're being watched. As I got out of the taxi, I noticed the animals, the goats, chickens, and even the village dogs were huddled in groups, far from the big tree in the middle of the yard. They didn't graze near it, didn't wander close to it, nothing. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. Animals are weird sometimes, right? My grandmother was sitting on the porch, her frail body wrapped in a colorful kente cloth. She looked older than I remembered, her face etched with deep lines that seemed more from worry than age. She greeted me warmly, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Kojo, my boy," she said, her voice raspy. "It's good to see you." "You too, Nana," I replied, sitting next to her. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time fetching water, helping Nana with chores, and occasionally walking into the village to buy provisions. But the animals' behavior kept nagging at me. Not once did I see them go near the tree. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard it for the first time. Whispers. Faint, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. I sat up, straining to hear. They seemed to be coming from outside, near the tree. My curiosity got the better of me, so I tiptoed to the window and peeked out. The moonlight illuminated the yard, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow move beneath the tree. But when I blinked, it was gone. The next morning, I asked Nana about the tree. "It's just a tree, Kojo," she said, her tone a little too casual. "Why do you ask?" "I noticed the animals won't go near it," I said, watching her closely. She paused, her hands tightening around the mortar she was using to grind spices. "Animals are superstitious creatures," she said finally, avoiding my gaze. "Pay them no mind." Her answer didn't sit well with me, but I decided to drop the subject. That afternoon, I met Kwaku, an old childhood friend who still lived in the village. Over a calabash of palm wine, I mentioned the tree. Kwaku's face darkened immediately. "Kojo, don't go near that tree," he said, his voice low. "Why not?" He hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "There are stories," he said finally. "Old stories. That tree it's not normal. People say strange things happen around it. Some even claim it's cursed." I laughed nervously. "You don't actually believe that, do you?" Kwaku didn't laugh. "Just stay away," he said firmly. That night, the whispers returned. This time, they were louder, more insistent. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, as they grew into a low chant. I don't know what possessed me, but I got up and went to the window again. What I saw chilled me to my core. My grandmother was standing under the tree. Her back was to me, but I could see her swaying slightly, her arms raised. She was chanting in a language I didn't recognize, her voice low and guttural. I wanted to call out to her, but something held me back. Then she turned around. Her eyes, they were glowing red. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding. What the hell was happening? The next morning, I confronted her. Nana, what were you doing outside last night? She didn't deny it. You shouldn't have seen that, she said, her voice cold and distant. What's going on, Nana? What are you hiding? She sighed, and for a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. But instead, she said, You ask too many questions, Kojo. Some things are better left alone. Over the next few days, I noticed other strange things. Small bundles of herbs and bones appeared around the tree. Villagers avoided our compound entirely, crossing the street to walk on the other side. And Nana became increasingly distant, her eyes always darting toward the tree. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of drums. It wasn't coming from far away. It was right outside, deep and steady, echoing through the compound. My first instinct was to stay in bed, pretend I didn't hear it, but something pulled me to the window. When I looked out, I saw her again, my grandmother standing under the tree. But this time, she wasn't alone. A group of shadowy figures stood in a circle around her, their faces hidden by dark cloths. They moved in rhythm with the drumming, slow and deliberate, their bodies swaying as if in a trance. I froze, unable to look away. Nana held something in her hands, a small carved figurine wrapped in red and black cloth. She raised it above her head and began chanting in that same guttural voice I'd heard before. Then she turned, and I saw her eyes. They weren't just glowing, they were blazing, like embers pulled straight from a fire. She scanned the yard until her gaze locked on me. I ducked back, heart pounding, but I could still hear her chanting. It grew louder, more forceful, as if the words themselves were pushing through the walls. My whole body felt heavy, like I was being pulled down. I tried to move, to scream, but I couldn't. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise. I lay there, drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling until the first light of dawn. When I finally stepped outside the next morning, the tree looked different. The bark was cracked and blackened, like it had been struck by lightning. The air around it felt heavy, suffocating. My grandmother was in the kitchen, humming softly as if nothing had happened. Nana, I started, but my voice cracked. What was that last night? She turned to me, her face calm and unreadable. You should leave today, Kojo, she said quietly. You don't belong here anymore. Her words hit me like a slap. I didn't argue. I packed my things and left that afternoon, catching the first taxi back to Accra. I haven't been back since, but sometimes I dream of that tree. Its gnarled branches reaching for the sky, the weight of the air around it. And every time, I wake up to the faint sound of drums echoing in my ears.